piece, and that's
Oh, yeah.
what
Yeah.
stuck on my head.
Right. So how's your summer been actually?
Pretty excellent, actually. It
Good.
started. I switched back to my old sign, which honestly changed everything.
Really?
Yeah, I felt like I had too much sign. It was a
Mhm.
24 by 36, and it was clear, and I had it on an antique dolly, so it was no more than like waist high. So it was down low, but I did this little red painted tarot sign with the
Mhm.
price and such, and I realized had to keep answering the crystal ball question, and no, I'm not a fortune teller. And my sign with the architecture of well-being and to enhance your decision making was not there to do its job.
Mhm.
And one day, a couple of weeks ago, I just snapped the sign in half to remove the big piece at the bottom, left all the information at the top, and everyone will walk by and just look at it now and go, "Oh, I like that." Boom, in the chair.
Hmm.
So just switching the sign, I kept thinking, when is the season really going to start? And the reality was, it started when my branding was clear. So
Ah, okay. Well, that seems important. Um,
yeah, it was immediate. I mean, the day I did it, everything quintupled.
mhm.
So
And
you
the
know,
weather is usually fine in Taos, is it?
usually that's the one thing that's been getting me a bit is um, for the last couple of months, I've had maybe 3.5 days a week. And in the last week, finally, I've been able to be out there 5 and 6 days. And when it starts to rain, I just pull the stuff I don't want to get wet under a balcony and
Uh-huh.
just wait for 20 minutes. And then the deluge stops and the evening's nice and cool.
That's nice. It sounds like Honolulu.
It pretty much.
Yeah.
I call Taos the Maui above 7,000 feet.
Hmm.
So it had that 60s to 80s temperature that's going on.
Well, you certainly seem no worse for wear for the altitude. When I go up at that altitude, I just can't breathe, pretty
Well,
much.
it's interesting that you say that because going between Taos at 7,000 and my cabin, which is 6 miles above Red River at 9,300, I found my sweet spots like between 9,100 and 94. When I get up above 9,700, I start huffing and puffing.
Mhm.
But it's nice because I think it's I think it was being so long in the martial arts, I breathe slowly and deeply. And I actually, with high altitude, instead of just hydrating, if you just hold your inhale for 2 or 3 seconds,
Mhm.
have time to offload the oxygen. And within 1 or 2 days, your autonomic functions will slow your breathing down. And I've clients who've been there, I've mentioned that to them. Just hold the inhale, and
Mhm.
they'll come back 3 or 4 days later and go, "Wow, I'm not having headaches. It's all cool, and this altitude is so nice."
Yeah.
Instead of sucking air kind of thing.
Yeah, Helena is about my limit, I think. I'm never comfortable, even in Denver.
Right at 5, right,
Yeah, right.
or 50 or 80.
Yeah. Anyway, good evening, everyone. We're talking about two essays on analytical psychology by C.G. Jung. And we're talking about the man of personality. And I'm wondering if our friend here is a psychologist. I doubt so, but maybe she is. So we'll leave it at that because she wants to remain anonymous on the screen. And so let's see what is going on.
It's interesting about the man of personality. I read something last week that if it comes up, I'll bring it up. If not, no, it's not that important. But that might add a little more
Okay.
thing to.
Well, since you've mentioned it, let's trot it out and then we'll move on.
Well, the whole idea of, and then there was manna from heaven, that whole piece. I read an article that sometimes the locust swarms are driven too far into the desert just by winds or by their own either miscalibration of direction, and they die and they fall from the sky. And that the locusts, the grasshoppers, were looked by desert people as desert shrimp, and they would cook them up and eat them. So that manna piece, I don't know if I just read one article, so I don't want to put any basis in it from that's the reason. But it was interesting to me that just the notion of grasshoppers, locusts, being desert shrimp, and the manna from the sky, instead of some flaky white, who knows what nutritional thing from aliens or whatever, it was actually nature pushing locusts too far into the desert where they happened to drop where the people were, and they just picked them up and ate them. So it's this huge protein source.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's not my favorite entree, but what can I say? Okay, folks, let's see. Well, we're going to read through the next couple pages as quickly as possible. We're talking about some areas that I'm not terribly familiar with, but let's see how it goes. Okay.
We're starting on paragraph 387. Is that
387? Yes, on page 232 of volume 7 for those of you who have your books. And so here we go. The immediate goal of the analysis of the unconscious, therefore, is to reach a state where the unconscious contents no longer remain unconscious and no longer express themselves indirectly as animus and anima phenomena. That is to say, a state in which the animus and the anima become functions of relationship to the unconscious. So long as they are not this, they are autonomous complexes, disturbing factors that break through the conscious control and act like true disturbers of the peace. Because this is such a well-known fact, my term complex, as used in this sense, has passed into common speech. The more complexes a person has, the more they are possessed. And when we try to form a picture of the personality which expresses itself through their complexes, we must admit that it resembles nothing so much as a historical woman. Okay, well, this was a man who was born in the 19th century, so I'll have to forgive him a little bit, i.e. the anima. But if such a man makes himself conscious of his unconscious contents, as they appear firstly in the factual content of their personal unconscious, and then in the fantasies of the collective unconscious, he will get to the roots of his complexes and in this way rid himself of his possession. With that, the anima phenomenon comes to a stop. Okay. Well, I have a couple of personal experiential issues with this. One, that I wrote a novel possessed by my anima for whatever it was, 8 months. And when it did stop, but let's see, how many years later? No, but earlier I had been, gobsmacked by the anima of my now wife, and that ended my first marriage of 17 years with 3 little daughters at the time. My youngest daughter was 5 years old when that happened. And so these anima possessions can be quite powerful. And, I gradually started to get hold of that. I mean, I left my first wife on January 2nd, 1986. And in about 1990 is when I picked up Man and His Symbols for the first time. And in 1987, I learned about the Myers-Briggs type indicator and had many experiences with it over the next 2 years because I was going to quite a lot of military senior schools in my reserve capacity. So I went to Command and Staff College, Naval War College, Industrial College of the Armed Forces, National War College, and the Center for Creative Leadership. And they all use the Myers-Briggs. Now, Guardian newspaper this week had a fallacious article about psychological instruments. If you saw that article in the Guardian this week, I recommend that you rethink that. I don't exactly remember why that took so much exception to it, except they didn't really correctly talk about the authors of the Myers-Briggs. I mean, they weren't wrong that the two women founded it, but they were pretty wrong about some of the things that they said about the types. And of course, there was no reference to Jung's personality types, which is volume 6, I think, of the collected works. So
No, in that article, I read it and then I grimaced and I moved on because I went, nope, they're still trying to make a point instead of play the both and. Because even in this paragraph, when and no longer express themselves indirectly as animus and anima phenomena, to me, that's when they stop expressing that way indirectly, because they both together come together to dance as the process of the creative drive.
right.
And to me, I've looked at that, and I haven't ever published any of the stuff I've written, but there's a piece of that I always call the complex that is the artistic complex or the creative drive complex. And it has the creation and destruction, just like nature, as a natural thing instead of a good and a bad thing. It's a both and inner weather thing.
Right. Well, one of the things we sort of got roped into doing this book last year by one of our friends who promptly stopped coming to the meetings after he got us into doing it. The book is kind of dated, in my opinion. I mean, it was written, a lot of these essays were written in the 19-teens, and they were only at the beginning of Jung's researches and what he knew. And he knew lots more 30, 40 years later. And so we are reading it for historical purposes, but it has a long appendix also, which I'm not planning to read. So we're going to do 10 more pages, which is 241 to 241. We're on 232 now. And, I just don't think this reference to historical women is helpful, and people don't understand what he meant by historical women. Anyway.
what happens is this is a early 20th century, late 19th century carryover of men in power, as it were. And the language at the time reflected that. But I think if we remove, I was trying for about 6 months this last year to stop saying anima and animus and just say animaus, M-A-U-S, the great mother.
Mm-hmm.
But even that started to be a little too one or the other sided. And now, every time I see the word, I know we're trying to change when he says him to they, or
Right.
his to people, etc. Every time I see the word anima or animus, I'm now saying creative drive, creative drive, creative drive. Because I think that what happens is I know Pacifica, some people there are trying to come up with a new word for the unconscious and a new word for anima and animus. But I think it's as simple as, well, that's the creative drive. And it just depends on which person, gendered however they are, is working with it, works with it. Instead of
Right.
playing
Well, I'm not accepting that it's only creative drive, because I think it's also, it pulls men around by the loop in their nose.
the sex drive, right? The sexual drive.
Right. So, okay, arguably that's creative drive, but I don't mind if they find new words for these things, but as we know, new words for things that are well established is rather problematic. And here I do not agree with him that if you only pull up from your unconscious one experience with anima, and now you know what it is, that it goes away. That's not true. That is not the case at all.
Yeah, and I think when he says it goes away, I think it's not a going away. I think it's an integration where no longer is it prominently the poster child of what the heck's going on in your psyche.
Sure it is. And he wasn't into his work on individuation yet when he wrote the essays in this book. So we can forgive him for that. And he did some brilliant things, but by golly, he did some things that were really arcane. Like this week, I'm reading in volume 3 of the Black books, and I found a call for help from Jung, and it related to how to convey to theologians that the area that they're dealing in is the unconscious. It's not an external being that's a puppeteer, an external puppeteer who's guiding your life. God is internal, not external. And he realized that, and he realized it I can even tell you exactly what it was. It was January the 9th, 1914. And he was having a active imagination, which involved Izdubar, who does appear in the Red Books. And Izdubar is apparently Gilgamesh by a different name. And he meets Izdubar in this active imagination, but then they started to have a talk, and he starts to talk to Izdubar about certain scientific discoveries. And as he does that, this totally trashes Izdubar. He gets sick and almost is dead, and he's trying to figure out how he can bring him back to life. And then he realized that this is this he called it a fantasy at that time, but it's an imaginal figure that he could do with it as he wished. So he squeezed Istabar down to a tiny size and put him in an egg, and then put him in his pocket. And and then he went off to do what he had to do and spent a night. And then the next time he opened the egg to find Istabar comes out all well again. He says, "Did anything go wrong? You know, I'm fine. I'm here." And so he realized that the traditional religions, all of them probably need to accept that their stories are referring to something that's going on in the unconscious.
Mhm.
It's not about the physical world out here. And he says in answer to Job, if it weren't so, then these stories would be in the textbooks of natural science, but they're not. But nonetheless, they're real, quite real. And so he had that realization on the 9th of January. On the 10th, so we're at January 10th, 1914, he says, "I'm really confused. If there's anybody out there that can help me, please let me know." Okay, he literally writes that into the book. That he never put in the red book. It's only in the black book. It's only in his notebook. And we wouldn't have it but for Sonu Shamdasani's 23 years of translating these books. So now we have it. And I'm not sure how many people understand its significance, but 40 years later, he was extremely frustrated that he had not been able to get his point across. And even 10 days before his death, he wrote the essay that appears in Man and His Symbols. And he said, you know, apparently the conscious mind doesn't know how to help here. So if there's anybody out there who might know something, maybe they should step up. And so it turns out we know something. And so we can help with that process. But he went to his grave not having successfully conveyed that information to his following.
And I would completely agree. And I think in that same vein, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and in the Red Book Images, notwithstanding any of the text, we see Jung the person. You see Jung with his complexes. And so even with the Red Book, for example, it's not my story, except there are places, primarily a lot of it, where metaphorically, similarly, it's my story, but just like me creating my own tarot deck, where how am I going to tell the visual story? If I did the Red Book, it would not be Jung's Red Book, it would be mine. And so there's a personal unconscious, I think, that we see in the Red Book, and especially in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, that throughout the rest, and this is to me what's one of the most impressive things about Jung's mind and his work, is not just the ability to weigh two concepts, whether you agree with them or not, initially, during, or after, but that you take 22 volumes in the Bollingen series, and that's work. And it's relatively, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, general and applicable to everyone. Whereas when you get Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and the Red Book, you have to take issue here and there because you're basically reading a visual narrative biography. And that's the way his personality expresses what he is. And I really think that the counterpoint of over 20 volumes in one place of work, counterpointed to 2 volumes, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and the visual parts of the Red Book, we get that enantiodromia and the
Yeah.
personal and collective at one time.
Right. So, this was quite surprising to me. It basically is a call to us to try to figure out what he was trying to get at. And he was trying to get at this very simple point, which is for all religions are imaginal. They're part of the psyche. They're in the psyche. And they're true. In that respect, they're true. Whether or not they're physically true in the physical world, they are true in the unconscious. And it's real. Now, that's the point that he was frustrated about. So it appears in Ion, paragraph 63. It appears in Answer to Job in paragraph 751, which we'll probably get to next week, next Sunday. And it appears in Man and His Symbols, and probably some other places too. But he expresses his frustration that he's never been able to get his point across, and people don't understand what he's getting at. But what he's getting at is that very simple fact that everything about religion is internal. That's it.
Well, yeah, it is that. I think that's it. And also, I think part of the trappings of him not being able to get it across were then he was swimming in an industrial revolution mentality of things and solutions and processes of repetition that were all about capital R reason. And he was looking at both and the logic, intellect, and the has no reasons or unreasonable. They are simply because they are visual, artistic, unconscious. And he was playing with both. And most people would dispense with the unconscious or the artistic as, okay, that's nice, now get back to work.
Yeah.
Instead of, how am I going to take that creative piece and make that the heart of the matter of my actions? And I think that's even today, 3%, 5%, maybe 6% of the people will actually try to think both and.
Yeah.
Instead of, oh, I have to choose, I have to show my work, and I have to have a solution, and I have to have the profit margin, and I have to be profitable.
Mhm.
But the current value of the visual is often missing in that. And people wonder sometimes why businesses disappear. It's not poor management. I think it's lack of management of the both and. They don't get why they've been started, and so they dilute the business the further they go along.
Right. So I wanted to give a shout out to my friend Penelope Ryder from London, who's here at 2:30 in the morning. She's frequently talking to me in the middle of her night. Anyway, 388, do you want to read that?
Certainly. Paragraph 388. That superior power, however, which caused the possession, for which I cannot shake off, must in some sense be superior to me, should logically disappear with the anima. One should then be, in quotes, complex free. I love this. Psychologically house trained, so to speak. Nothing more should happen that is not sanctioned by the ego. And when the ego wants something, nothing should be capable of interfering. The ego would thus be assured of an impregnable position, the steadfast of a Superman, or the sublimity of a perfect sage. Both figures are ideal images. Napoleon on the one hand, Lao Tzu on the other. Both are consistent with the idea of, in quotes, the extraordinarily potent, which is the term that Layman, in his celebrated monograph, Mana, uses for his definition of mana, I therefore call such a personality simply the monopersonality. It corresponds to a dominant of the collective unconscious, to an archetype which has taken shape in the human psyche through untold ages of just that kind of experience. Primitive man does not analyze and does not work out why another is superior to them. If he or they possessed of a stronger power, and by the same token, they can lose this power, perhaps because someone has walked over them in their sleep or stepped on their shadow.
Right. Well, very definitely. So, who are major monofigures today?
Zelensky.
Monoperson. Yep, he's one.
I'd love to say Biden, but we've got a tricky rough patch going on. But at the same time, I would add him. But the bigger one I would say would be back up to say Liz Cheney and Vladimir Zelensky.
Yeah, and I have to thank Penelope for a lovely super chat she put on to this evening. So thank you, Penelope. Okay, well, Zelensky surely Liz Cheney. She's destined probably to be the first woman president, is what I guess.
Right.
And I'm not saying when, but at some point, because she's been the rock that is going to allow the traditional Republican Party to reform after it's been crushed by what Donald Trump has done to it. And of course, Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin. I wouldn't necessarily say Biden, but on the other hand, Biden really didn't ever announce for the presidency in the election for 2020. He just went along and said, well, yeah, maybe I'll run. But he never really went after it hard. And people just flowed to him because the choices were so terrible in 2020. And so he was a magnet. So to that extent, I do agree with you that he's a man of personality, albeit an older one, like me. he's not that far ahead of me. So anyway.
Well, I think if we can get Rumi and Anais Nin in the current stream of mana personalities, we might get somewhere quicker.
Yeah, well, Rumi is definitely one who has maintained his personality over 800 years, I guess, and Anais Nin certainly has maintained. Some authors and artists of all kinds do serve that role. And, even Tim Holmes, to a certain extent, does that. And so we know people have mana that is attractive. People are attracted to them, and you can't help yourself. If you love them, you love them, and so they're out there, and at every level. I mean, all we're doing is pointing out the most famous ones of our times.
Well, right, and that's the thing too. Is I think I call them the soundbite people, the people that everybody would see. There's the work that's not necessarily grassroots and on the ground, that people who are just as passionately, intensely successful in how they've evolved to present themselves, and what they have to say, but they aren't on the billboard.
Yeah. And people don't appreciate it necessarily. What people do. But anyway, so let's just keep moving, because I have a favorite paragraph in here and I want to get to it. So historically, this is 389 now. Historically, the main monopersonality evolves into the hero and the godlike being, whose earthly form is the priest. How very much the doctor's still mana is the whole plaint of the analyst. For insofar as the ego apparently draws to itself the power belonging to the anima, the ego does become a monopersonality. This development is an almost regular phenomenon. I've never yet seen a fairly advanced development of this kind, where at least a temporary identification with the archetype of the monopersonality did not take place. It is the most natural thing in the world that this should happen, for not only does one expect it oneself, but everybody else expects it too. One can scarcely help admiring oneself a little for having seen more deeply into things than others, and the others have such an urge to find a tangible hero somewhere, or a superior wise man, a leader and father, some undisputed authority that will build temples to little tin gods with the greatest promptitude and burn incense upon the altars. This is not just a lamentable stupidity of idolaters, incapable of judging for themselves, but natural psychological law, which says that what has once been will always be in the future. And so it will be, unless consciousness puts an end to the naive concretization of primordial images. I do not know whether it is desirable that consciousness should alter the eternal laws. I only know that occasionally it does alter them, and that this measure is a vital necessity for some people, which, however, does not always prevent these same people from setting themselves up on the Father's throne and making the old rule come true. It is indeed hard to see how one can escape the sovereign power of the primordial images. Okay. Jordan,
I think that's what we were speaking of before with, the ones who have the monopersonality are not escaping the power of the primordial images. They're integrating them in their presentation, and there's no fear of them. There's no recourse to avoid them. And I think that happens now with the either or, where people have too much quote unquote reason. And frankly, the reason in politics these days is not reason. It's who can bash the other one more. And less over the last 20 years, we see politicians even saying anything substantial about what they will do, maybe here and there. But I think the monopersonality people, they don't escape the sovereign power of the primordial images. They have that as an integral part of themselves.
Yeah. Okay. You want to read the next paragraph? Yeah.
Actually, I do not believe it can be escaped. One can only alter one's attitude and thus save oneself from naively falling into an archetype and being forced to act a part at the expense of one's humanity. Possession by an archetype turns a man, a person, into a flat collective figure, a mask behind which they can no longer develop as a human being, but becomes increasingly stunted. One must therefore be aware of the danger of falling victim to the dominant of the monopersonality. The danger lies not only in oneself becoming a father mask, but in being overpowered by this mask when worn by another, master and pupil are in the same boat in this respect.
Right. And I just say that this happens pretty much in everyone's life, vis-a-vis the parents. So when you're born, you're a wild animal and you don't know what's going on. But very soon you start to see your parents as God and Goddess. Okay. And I explicitly remember this happening when I was 5 years old to me, where I recognized my mother as a goddess. And, but normally we grow past that archetypal possession when we get a little bit older. I mean, girls, as soon as they reach puberty, start to disagree with their mothers about everything they do, which is kind of I guess teenage girls definitely set up a duality between themselves and their mothers. And so there's often a lot of friction in those age ranges, let's say from 12 to 18 or something like that, or even 20. And some families never get over it, and some find a way to integrate it and have a loving relationship later on. But it's something that we should talk to children about so that they understand what's happening to them. What do you think?
Well, completely, because it happens with boys to men as well. And it's that duality that's set up that I am not you. Thank you for the modeling, but I will now become me. And what happens then is the personality and the identity begin to, leaps and bounds develop when that occurs. And when a parent attempts to stifle that, that's when that indelible conflict starts to occur. And I think that, I had someone sit at my table this last weekend, and it was a mom and a daughter, and, that I won't go into the details, but the daughter had very definitely become worldly. And this was a trip for them for a week and a half for the mom to witness the woman that she had given birth to, not the woman that was once her daughter, and to witness the woman in her natural habitat. And it was such a poetically, intensely beautiful expression of what a good mentor, tormentor, parent is.
Yeah.
This was, I honor you for doing all these things that you have done. And that was powerful to witness, because
Right.
one, hope for a younger generation that person, that woman will take that forward, realizing what a powerful what a powerful event in my life this is, that not just being recognized, but just hanging out with mom, but now I'm a colleague,
Yeah. Now my girlfriend, not only a daughter that is being taught the ropes. Okay, so what did we read? Did you read 390 yet?
You read 390. No, okay. I read. I think I read. Did I read 390? No, I read.
Have we read 390?
Yeah, I read 391. I'll read 391.
Okay, go ahead. Go for it.
The dissolution of the anima means that we have gained insight into the driving forces of the unconscious, but not that we have made these forces ineffective. They can attack us at any time in new form. Yeah. And they will infallibly do so if the conscious attitude has a flaw in it. It's a question of might against might. If the ego presumes to wield power over the unconscious, the unconscious reacts with a subtle attack, deploying the dominant of the mana personality, whose enormous prestige casts a spell over the ego. Against this, the only defense is full confession of one's weakness in face of the powers of the unconscious. By opposing no force to the unconscious, we do not provoke it to attack.
Yeah. We have to recognize these things, not fix them, because you're never going to escape them. You have to recognize them. Let's see.
Yeah, I think that synopsizes that pair. Recognize these things in lieu of synopsizing them.
Yeah, and keep in mind, let's just talk about individuation for a few sentences here. Individuation is a part of your natural growing process, and it goes on throughout your life. So your unconscious does everything. It builds your whole body to include all the organs and all the blood and all the muscles, everything, and replaces your every cell in your body every 7 years without fail. And so that's your unconscious at work, and it knows what it's doing. And so when you're out of whack in your unconscious is when these complexes come in and whack you, right? and my parents were very sweet people who weren't into corporal punishment, but when I was in the 8th grade, I think my brother and I were tormenting my sister over something. I don't know what we were doing, but my mother comes up to me and she just reaches back and takes a swing across my face, except I put my arm up, and she nearly broke her arm on my arm. That was the last time that she attempted to spank me. Okay.
Yeah, there's a point when the child can take the father over their knee, or that no longer can the parent take the child over their knee, so to speak.
Right. And she did, I think on that occasion, she did grab both my arms, hold them together, and get a whack in, but that was the last time. And I think my father tried to do it when I was about 20, and I deserved it that time. I remember what I did, so what can I say? But when my mother tried to spank me when I was 39, because she didn't want me to leave my first wife, all I did was say, "Mom, you're out of line here. You can't tell me this. You don't know what's going on in my household, and I'm sorry, you just can't correct me this way."
Funny, because my dad he used to always just chuckle incessantly when he told this story, but someone would say, "So when were you never able to take Jordan over your knee anymore?" He said, "Well, there was a point when he was about 16 where it hadn't happened in years, but it was coming up, except in the hallway, all of a sudden there was just this subtle movement on his hips. I didn't see anything else, but I felt the hair in my head, whoosh, and his foot had just whipped across over top of my head, and made the hair blow up." He said, "We changed the course of that conversation relatively quickly." Now I could come into anywhere, and he would deal with the trouble. So anyway, but
right.
Those
Okay.
points are all parents and children.
Right. So moving on as quickly as we can here. Yeah. It may sound rather comical to the reader if I speak of the unconscious in this personal way. I hope I shall not arouse the prejudice that I regard the unconscious as something personal. The unconscious consists of natural processes that lie outside the sphere of human personality. Only our conscious mind is personal. Therefore, when I speak of provoking the unconscious, I do not mean that it is offended and, like the gods of old, rises up to smite the offender in jealous anger or revenge. What I mean is more like an error in psychic diet, which upsets the equilibrium of my digestion. The unconscious reacts automatically like my stomach, which, in a manner of speaking, wreaks its revenge upon me when I presume to have power over the unconscious. That is like a dietary solecism, an unseemly attitude, which, in the interest of one's own well-being, were better avoided. My unpoetical comparison is, if anything, far too mild in the view of the far-reaching and devastating moral effects of a disordered unconscious. I don't know what he said there, but anyway. In this regard, it would be more fitting to speak of the wrath of offended gods. Okay, so the point is, your unconscious knows how to replace every cell in your body every 7 years. It does this automatically. It knows what it's doing. And one of the things that it's managing is your psyche. And that's a natural part of your person. And so when you do things that are contrary to what your unconscious wants, it lets you know, okay, one way or another. In one of my cases was it broke my leg, caused me to be careless on ice, and I slipped and fell in a parking lot on Marine Corps Base Quantico, and that was the end of my Marine Corps career. My psyche just said, "Nope, you're not doing this anymore." Whack. That was that.
Yeah, I think that's his, the dietary solecism, which is, solecism is a grammatical mistake or a misstep or a breach of good manners or a piece of incorrect behavior. Mm-hmm. So he's saying that, and basically it goes back to, he already said it with upsets the equilibrium of my digestion. Well, the dietary solecism is what did that. It's like you had a bad week, or you misstepped on the ice.
Right. So if ever you were to have a love affair, let's say, that's outside your marriage, on either side, men or women, because it takes two to tango, your unconscious does rise up and objects and causes you to know that it's not very happy about what you're doing. Now, as it happened for me, there was never any doubt for me. So when I left my first wife and went to my second wife, I was only not with a wife for about 6 hours, not even that. And so it didn't take me long to have a partner again, but there was never any doubt. I never looked back. And I've always been extremely respectful to my first wife, and in June we were at the graduation party of one of my grandsons, and we were standing within 1.5 feet of one another. Nobody swung at each other. We love each other in a certain way. We love each other for the children we share together.
So the War of the Roses had ended. It's like,
well, it ended. It never really started, because I said right from the beginning that I still love you. I just don't want to live with you anymore. That's it.
Well, right, when you expressed part of the story where you guys are in the stair hall, and then this note gets dropped down from your daughter of stop fighting, I mean, where you came to this realization, like in situ, in the moment, and went, oh, and you grokked it. And
Yeah. I mean, it just all came together in that moment, and I knew we weren't going to be able to, because I did not have the knowledge that I have now. If I knew then what I know now, we could have saved the marriage probably, but because I didn't and didn't have these psychological skills, it was over. And and I don't regret it, because it's part of my individuation, my learning. But my point about individuation is you're individuating. Your unconscious is causing you to individuate 7 by 24 by 365. And if it's not happy about something you're doing, it's going to let you know for sure. And it comes up in the form of a bad conscience, or whatever. Sometimes it comes up in the form of some sort of accident, car accident, or an accident around the house, where typically the way this would manifest is your mind is 1,000 miles away, arguing with your unconscious about what you should do in this situation, and you don't notice that there's a pail of water in front of you that causes you to trip and fall or something like that. And because of that, you fall and break your leg or something like that, and then look how silly you are. So it's better, as we're going to get to in answer to Job, in paragraph 746, you can either be conscious of your individuation and get to the destination walking upright, but if you're not conscious of it, you're going to get dragged by it, and you'll call it fate. It was fate that this happened. But if you say something happened to you that was fate, that's what we're talking about here.
And if you realize close enough after the quote unquote fateful action, you can often go, oh, what was that trying to tell me? And if you're still alive, because one thing I like to say is that anybody who's alive is batting 1,000 at getting through every single problem that's ever occurred to them in their life. It's
Sure.
So that don't worry about it, don't waste trouble, and try to dial into, well, okay, that fateful piece, okay, I misstepped. I had that solo. But how can I integrate that? How can I look at that as what was, while I'm stop dropped, face planted on the concrete, what can I get from that? What did that tell me that beyond wrong path? It looked like a normal sidewalk, except then I thought I knew how to walk. I've walked since I was young. Obviously not that day. Walking was not a talent.
Right. And in the case of my broken leg, I had plenty of time to work it out, because my leg was above my heart for 13 weeks. And I had a non-weight bearing cast for 9 of those weeks, and 4 I had a weight bearing cast, but it was bloody awful, and I'm still living with the consequences today, since I've now recently had to have a ankle replacement and all kinds of stuff. So it has ripples down through the years, and so it's a lesson that one learns. I guess if you're starting to have a bad conscience over anything, you better start working out what that's caused by, because it's in you.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's your fault.
Own up to your stuff and don't spatter it out on everybody else, right?
Right. Yeah. And so, hi, Susan. Nice to see you. Yeah, and Penelope says around age 15 we individuate again and must be allowed to be our own person. Right. And so daughters who are smart enough to realize when they're mid-20s that their mother was pretty smart after all are the best fixed, probably. Unless the mother and the father are just abusive parents, and in that case there's probably no hope.
Well, I remember the two things later in life. I realized that when I was growing up, I was having the opportunity to watch my parents still growing up. But my joke was, I was talking to my dad once, and I said, Dad, you were so full of it, so full of it. All of a sudden, when I was 19 or 20, you started catching on real quick. It's like
yeah, right. Okay, you want to read 393.
In differentiating the ego from the archetype of the mana personality, one is now forced, exactly as in the case of the anima, to make conscious those contents which are specific of the mana personality. Historically, the mana personality is always in possession of the secret name or of some esoteric knowledge, or has the prerogative of a special way of acting. Quod licet Jovi, non licet bovi. In a word, it has an individual distinction. Conscious realization of the contents composing it means for the man, the second and real liberation from the father, and for the woman, liberation from the mother. And with it comes the first genuine sense of his or her true individuality. This part of the process corresponds exactly to the aim of the concretistic primitive initiations up to and including baptism, namely severance from the carnal, in quotes, or animal parents, and rebirth in novum infantium into a condition, or new infant, into a condition of immortality and spiritual childhood, as formulated by certain mystery religions of the ancient world, among them Christianity.
Right. So Donald Trump is an example of this, and the esoteric knowledge he has that most people couldn't fathom for quite some time was that he knew he could get away with things, and so when he has done things, for the last 25 years and probably much longer, maybe going back into his teens, he's found that he was never called on it, and that he could get away with it, and that when people sued him, he could get away with it. He could wiggle out of the situation one way or another. And so what most of us would never try to do, he has done and done successfully, and he knows, that's his esoteric knowledge, that he knows that he can get away with it, and he won't be run up on a flagpole because of it. And even when he loses, as he did with the Trump University early in his presidency, he just pays the fiddler and goes on, knowing that it doesn't make a lot of difference for his well-being. But eventually you get to the point where it's just not going to last, and we're getting to that the next two paragraphs. So
yeah, it's like finally the parent will be able to take him over the knee.
Yeah,
but it'll be the country.
Yeah, or the parent will just write him out of the will, and that's the end of it, or something. But But what happens with a man of personality like him is that people get sucked into it rather than being able to hold themselves away from it. And so he actually did take over the Republican Party. Oh my God. Who would have guessed that 5 years ago?
Well, yeah, in that sense, to compliment him, I have to say he was the best at not getting in trouble, the best at I can be a criminal and not be held accountable for it. In a sense, he's a public mob, as it were, except he doesn't have the same kind of cool character that most of them do, because they always have stories and cool things that they say. He can't finish a sentence. I mean, so I shouldn't insult the mob by attributing him to them, because they have character and he doesn't. So anyway.
Right. Okay. We're going to read 394 now, I guess. It is now quite possible that instead of identifying with the monopersonality, one will concretize it as an extra mundane Father in heaven, complete with the attribute of absoluteness, something that many people seem very prone to. This would be tantamount to giving the unconscious a supremacy that was just as absolute. If one's faith could be pushed that far so that all value would flow over to that side, the logical result is that the only thing left behind here is a miserable, inferior, worthless, and sinful little heap of humanity. This solution, as we know, has become a historical worldview. As I am moving here on psychological ground only and feel no inclination whatever to dictate my eternal truths to the world at large, I must observe by way of criticizing this solution that if I shift all the highest values over to the side of the unconscious, thus converting it into a summum bonum, I am then placing in the unfortunate position of having to discover a devil or equal weight and dimensions who could act as the psychological counterbalance to any summum bonum. Under no circumstances, however, will my modesty allow me to identify myself with the devil. That would be altogether too presumptuous and would, moreover, bring me into unbearable conflict with my highest values, nor with my moral deficit can I possibly afford it. You want to comment?
Well, I think actually you had a really nice slip with modesty there. You almost said wildness. And I think what's interesting here is modesty is oftentimes an unspoken wildness. It's almost a constraint put on something. And discretion shows us where to be modest. But sometimes modesty is inhibition rather than actually being modest. And that would be, being humble, modest, rather than, the unspoken wildness of modesty. I think with the identify myself with the devil, even in the tarot, I look at the devil not so much being about addiction. It's more about inhibition. They can enslave people more easily than excesses. When there's an addiction, look for what they are actually terrified of instead, and try to let those dance together. There's a big footnote he has on that may be worth reading about his take on the word absolute.
Okay.
That was in that. I'll read that.
Why don't you go ahead and read that, and then I'll get to read my favorite paragraph.
Cool. He says, if one's faith could be pushed that far so that all value would flow over to that side, and then we have footnote 6, in quotes, absolute means cut off, detached. To assert that God is absolute amounts to placing him outside all connection with mankind. Man cannot affect him, or he man. Such a God would be of no consequence at all. we can, in fairness, only speak of a God who is relative to man, people, as people are to God. The Christian idea of God as a quote unquote Father in heaven puts God's relativity in exquisite form, quite apart from the fact that a man can know even less about God than an ant can know of the contents of the British Museum. This urge to regard God as, in quotes, absolute derives solely from the fear that God might become, in quotes, psychological. This would naturally be dangerous. An absolute God, on the other hand, does not concern us in the least, whereas a psychological God would be real. This kind of God could reach man. The church seems to be a magical instrument for protecting man against this eventuality, since it is written, in quotes, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God.
Right. Okay. And so that's what the man of personality is. And if we fall into those hands, we're really scared, which is what the January 6th situation has made us. We're very scared about how our society can be corrupted in such a way that we lose control of it. You know, the people who think that Trump may protect their gun ownership is, you know, a vain hope, because, you know, Trump could just as easily come after your guns. And this is what Hitler, in fact, did. And Hitler got himself into power with the brown shirts, and then one fine day or one fine evening, the night of the long knives in 1933, he rounded up all the brown shirts, including their leader, and shot them. You know, dead men tell no tales. So, and nobody really knew why he did that, but he did that to consolidate his power. And Ernst Röhm, who was one of the people that was shot, you know, goes to his death, putting up his Nazi salute and shouting "Heil Hitler," as did Eichmann when he was hanged. You know, I guess Eichmann probably couldn't put it up his Nazi salute, but he certainly could say "Heil Hitler."
Well, that's that. You know, people take that to their grave, kind of thing. I mean, that's that unfortunate, one-sided fascism, and even under the course of death, they will not relinquish this dogma, and it's really, to me, a negative expression of stoicism.
Yeah, and so fortunately, I do think that we have enough Americans who will resist that and not vote any of these people up in a major position. But, you know, if they do, it's going to be Katie bar the door wherever they do it.
Or I thought about this the other day. It struck me as hilarious, probably unreasonable, or everyone will simply move to Mexico or Canada, and they'll be in rule, but there will be no one to rule.
Right, and my prediction is that, assuming Trump goes to jail, and now I think there's a fairly good chance of it, assuming he goes to jail, or even if he's convicted and just gets home confinement or something like that, nobody will admit that they ever supported him 2 years from now.
You know that, and then he'll probably say, "Oh, well, of course I'm the best. I'm the only president who's been incarcerated." So,
Yeah, right, right. And Murray Stein, who's the one of the authors of our play, said that, you know, after World War II, they couldn't find any Germans who were Nazis, and
right,
of course, they all were. Right.
right,
And so we can hope for that time and hope we don't have to have all the crockery broken in order to get to that time.
right.
So, all right. So paragraph 395, this is one of my favorite paragraphs in all Jungian psychology. And so please pay close attention. On psychological grounds, therefore, I would recommend that no God be constructed out of the archetype of the man of personality. In other words, he must not be concretized, for only thus can I avoid projecting my values and non-values into God and the devil, and only thus can I preserve my human dignity, my specific gravity, which I need so much if I am not to become the unresisting shuttlecock of unconscious forces. In his dealings with the visible world, a man must certainly be mad to suppose that he is the master of this world. And here's the key sentence. Here we follow quite naturally the principle of non-resistance to all superior forces up to a certain individual limit, beyond which the most peaceful citizen becomes a bloody revolutionary. Our bowing down before law and order is a commendable example of what our general attitude to the collective unconscious should be. Render under Caesar. Thus far, our obeisance would not be too difficult, but there are other factors in the world to which our conscience does not give unqualified assent, and yet we bow to them. Why? Because in practice it is more expedient than the reverse. Similarly, there are factors in the unconscious with regard to which we must be worldly wise. Quote, resist not evil, unquote. Quote, make yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, unquote. And quote, the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light, unquote. Ergo, quote, be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves, unquote. Okay, Jordan.
Yeah, the deferential respect of absolutely everyone is important. The be ye therefore wise as a serpent, or wise as serpents, meaning you can shed your skin and evolve and not remember the skin. You don't get hanging on to things, as well as you can move between two worlds, the world below and this one, and as harmless as doves, the peace metaphor. But as you said, to underline, in his dealings with the visible world, a man must certainly be mad to suppose that he is master of this world, et cetera, beyond which the most peaceful citizen becomes a bloody revolutionary. I mean, we see this time and time again. If you see an altercation, the person who has the hubris, who's, all vim, vigor, and bluster, as it were, versus the person who allegedly will always get get the sand kicked in their face. You drive that allegedly weak person far enough with all this bluster and hubris, they will turn around and cold cock you into tomorrow. And that's the bloody revolutionary, where it's not just the life will find a way. It's that when you threaten someone with their life, so to speak, they will turn and they will not sit idly by.
Right. In other words, I'll just give a personal example where when I was in about the fourth grade, there was a German Shepherd loose in my neighborhood, and you're familiar with this, Jordan, I presume. And all of a sudden it decided it didn't like me, and it started to attack me, and I started to run away, and it was getting closer and closer, and I knew that I could not get away by running, because it was running faster than me quite a bit. And so I simply stopped and turned around and looked at it, and the dog stopped, didn't know what to do with me, and left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The engagement where you went from activating.
Well, and also because I was in the fourth grade by then, I was maybe about as large as he was. And so it wasn't like he was after some small animal that he could crush. He didn't know how strong I was, which wasn't very at that point in my life, but he didn't know that. And
well, and even your height more at eye level, which is a threat to a dog. At upper, if you were much taller, it actually probably wouldn't have turned out that way, because they wouldn't have had the one-on-one headbutt of just eye contact perspective. Mm-hmm. If there was this, they still would have been running up, that way. I mean, I had my German Shepherd, 130-pound, half wolf, half German Shepherd. Mm-hmm. When she went, I was glad I was on my side of the leash, because that's a force to be reckoned with. Oh, but yeah. That you just stopped, turned, and engaged, then you went from her perceiving you with her prey drive to, oh, we're hunting, and so he leaves.
Right. Penelope says a girlfriend had 3 dogs at her in Greece yesterday. She lived in Maryland, and she was on a holiday there. She did not move. They were sheep dogs, and eventually they left one by one. Well, yeah, sheepdogs will definitely do that, but if you run away, they will eat you. Because the thing about a sheepdog is that they scare the sheep and keep the sheep together. And sometimes the shepherd, if he has a weak sheep, will give it to the dogs. So that herd of sheep actually belongs to them. I mean, it's lunch, right? And so, yeah, the way to handle any situation like that is simply stop and stare down the animal, not only dogs, but also lions or tigers or
I've seen videos of people with, a big staff walking on the trail, and the lion comes to attack, bam, bam, bam. And they just engage just as strong. And the lion kind of looks around and walks away, because this isn't an easy meal. And I think the thing comes down to, well, at least die with dignity. Or, is the Vikings would say, well, that's why we die with a joke on our breath, because we laugh at the end.
Right.
We win. We get nothing. So.
Right. So I'm going to suggest we stop at this point, because on account of it is Labor Day. I'm a little tired of having so much fun the last 2 weeks. I can't even begin to tell you. And I don't know what can come at me tomorrow. I'm getting myself on the substitute teaching list, and I don't think I'm going to be officially able to take substitute jobs this week, because they only took my fingerprints last Thursday, and I'm not sure they can run their investigation that fast. But probably next week, I probably will have to start taking physicians. But it could happen tomorrow, for all I know.
So, hold on, let me put this in here. Skip.
Yes.
God help the children.
Amen to that. I mean, we'll see. I mean, my wife and Tim are going back and forth about the dangers of AI, and I often giggle at them because AI may be good, but it has a long way to go. And I've been around AI for over 30 years now, and it has a long way to go. All you have to do is listen to your Alexa if you have one, and if the television has somebody on it named Alexa, the machine will answer and that sort of stuff. So in the case of the school district, they have an incredible system. I mean, they have it soup to nuts under control. Almost, not quite. Okay, because I didn't interact with a human being for 3 weeks, only with machines, only with the computers, my computer and theirs, right? And I never spoke to a human being, nothing. And so then they come back to me and say, well, we're going to give you an interview. And here are the interview dates, take your pick. And one of the interview dates was today, which happens to be Labor Day. So this wonderful AI system they have that has everything buttoned down pretty much, still I didn't know that today was a national holiday in the United States. Okay, so
Well, and I think to agree, but also go along with it, God help us when we deal with the AI terrible twos and the no, why 4-year-old. And do we get to the AI adolescence at least? And can you take the AI over your knee? I mean, it's like,
yeah.
so
Well, I mean, I suppose that there at some point there will be incidents of some sort that will cause us to be much more wary. But my expectation is that those points are going to come more like a century from now, not next week, even though, people are convinced that everything we're doing on computers is perfect, et cetera, and I can tell them that that is not the case.
yeah, I've seen some robotic videos, like they're testing it, and the whole program is, we are going to interfere with your attempt to make this action complete. So it goes and it goes, and they're using a baseball bat to knock it over, and they're pushing it over, and they're flipping it, and they're tripping it, and they're tricking it, and then there's a point where it stops, and it takes the bat out of the hand, and it breaks it in two, and it hits them in both legs. And part of me is like, that could be staged. But at the same time, if they're going to learn, there's a point where, look, you guys took this to interfere with my effective completion a little too far, and the boundary is established.
Yeah, and Penelope makes the correct point here that she says, we have power cuts, we will be stuck. And that is so true, because, around here, I lived in this wonderful home that was out in this cul-de-sac, which in Hurricane Isabel, that cul-de-sac became an island, and we lost power for a week. And you don't know how close we are to primitivity until you lose power for a week, because you have no place to toilet that's nice. You have no place to keep food cold. You have no place to cook food in many cases, or maybe you have a gas burner, but the pilot light won't work because it's electric.
I always said that that's a good point with Penelope, because I used to always tell my clients, it's like, well, the only problem with architectural computer and CAD drawing is, well, what happens if the power goes out? I've never broken my nose on my drawing table when the power goes out because my drawing board disappears and I fall flat on the floor and break my nose.
Yeah.
That's never happened. But I remember a client calling and going, we've had this huge storm. The power's been out all over the place. Are we still on for tomorrow? And I said, yeah, I started your project really late, so I just drew it by hand under a candle. And they're like, oh, okay. So, we brought flashlights. It was the kind of thing where I happened to get lucky. But if I would have on any other project, I wouldn't have been able to do anything because I didn't have access, quote unquote, to my pencil of all things. So yeah, if you've been the toilet piece, that's a good argument for gas.
Right.
So you at least can boil your water.
Right, and Penelope says something so true, which is yes. So getting rid of fiat money is a stupid idea. That will not work. We have to have cash because and cash that you can believe in, right? Because if the electricity is out, you can't go to the bank machine either. And
well, that and also that's a great point with the fiat money, because there can't be a run on banks when it's little green electrons and the power's off. Everyone just freaks out and implodes. But I mean, it starts to come to I think the duality of, my mattress is more rigid these days versus, why? Well, the foam has a little incision and all the cash is
right.
I look at my piece of plastic that I could stick in this magic box and it spits some out.
Right. So Penelope says, grateful to you both and these chats. Well, I'm glad.
Thank you very much.
Helping. Penelope and I have been friends for a number of years now. She lives in London, and so for her, it's
there's six
or
like 5,
4 in the morning or something like that.
Yeah.
3:30 in the morning, something. Anyway.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for being here, Penelope. I'm glad you could make it, and I'll chat with you tomorrow about other things, more cheery things, hopefully.
Well, best on substitution this week, and just best on substitution. And again, God help those kids.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to imagine, I'm this handicapped former Marine walking in with all this gray hair. And I remember how, all through school, not only in high school, but even in elementary school, when we would have a substitute that would have gray hair, we would, sort of snicker about it. What can this old geezer teach me type of thing?
I think that's kind of universal. When the substitute came in, it was always a hazing contest to see if they could even make it through the first 5 minutes. And then some substitutes that would shut the class down. You got the best educational experience in the next 55 minutes you probably ever had, because they.
Well, and that's what I intend to do, and I definitely have my ways, which are quiet but persuasive.
The handicapped Lieutenant Colonel Jungian came in and declared quiet.
Yeah, well, when people talk to me, I very often open people's unconscious, as you and I both know, of course, and so all of a sudden they can't wait for me to come back again. They want to. So anyway, it's very interesting. I'm watching. There's automatic translation going on, or automatic closed captioning going on our YouTube tonight.
Oh, cool. I'll have to go watch and see how well I sometimes look at things and just only read the closed captioning just for comedy fest as to the hooked on phonics of how they mess up any polysyllabic word.
Right. So it'll be interesting because I haven't taken an education course in, I don't know, 55 years. Something like
So
that.
now you'll be giving. Now it's time to give them.
Right. I'm living my career backward.
Benjamin Button. It's
Right, exactly. Anyway, okay. So good night, everyone. Thank you. Good night, Penelope. Get some sleep. I need some sleep too. So thank you, Jordan, for being here. We have fun when you're here.
Thanks.
And so now I'm going to sleep. Okay, take care, everybody. Happy Labor Day, and good luck with the school year. Good luck with the coming academic year and all that may bring. And peace.